I have been to prison, but only to visit Oliver Schmidt, the guy who got wrapped up in the whole Volkswagen emissions cheating scandal.
Oh, yeah.
He's in Milan prison, about 20 minutes south of Ann Arbor.
That's fascinating, John. How did that visit go?
I've been there about 4 times now.
Okay.
And it's a little bit freaky. You go into a visiting room, and there's a whole bunch of prisoners there with mainly family that are visiting them. And I've gone with Brett Smith from the Center for Automotive Research. He's kept in touch with Oliver. And Brett said, you ought to come out here one time when I go visit him. And I thought, I've never been to a prison. I got to go do it. And then we got the idea that we were actually going to do Autoline After Hours in prison. And I wrote to the warden and said, blah, 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 here's who we are. Here's what we'd like to do. Well, it turns out he's a car nut, knew who I was and everything like that. And we got permission to do it. And then all of a sudden, everything came to a screeching halt. And for whatever reasons, I don't know what, that warden was out and a new warden is in, and nobody's doing anything in his prison.
That's a shame. That would have been like an all-timer as far as, must-watch episodes go.
It would have been cool. It would have been cool for sure.
So, Pete, you may not know, but we actually had Oliver on shortly before it all came down.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah, and he was on the show twice, actually, and the audience loved him. And Gary came up with the best title of any show that we've ever done. He calls it Schmidt Happened.
Excellent.
I know you guys can't imagine I'd ever come up with anything like that.
I want to go back and check out that episode now and dig through the archives and find out what, that'd be great to watch, and just, knowing how it all has played out, see what sort of telltale indicators are in the conversation.
There are a few, actually, Pete. One of the things he talked about is just how complicated the California Air Resource Board standards are. So complicated. And I know I've run into this before too. I once had to call them to have them explain something to me because I didn't understand it. I was reading it online. I didn't understand it. They couldn't find anybody who could explain it to me.
That would never happen in Michigan, though.
Oh,
no. God, no. Don't even allude.
Oh, there we go.
We're about to go. This is Autoline After Hours with John McElroy and Gary Vasilash, episode 517 for July 16th of 2020. Will Michigan become a mobility mecca? Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Hey, Gary.
John, how are you?
Doing nice. And, this has been a nice rainy day. And I've actually liked it because we haven't seen the rain in weeks.
Yeah, it's been like a desert out there. And the rain is nice. And so we sit in our buildings and look outside at the rain. And here we are.
Yeah. Hey, you usually have a historic moment at this day and time, and I wonder if you've got one.
I do. So we're going to have a public official sort of on the show. So this has a little bit to do with that. And I am positive we're going to talk about Tesla. And as you know, Tesla is sort of playing Texas off of Oklahoma in terms of where it may be putting its next assembly plant. So this has to do with Oklahoma City. 85 years ago today, the very first parking meter was installed, and it was in Oklahoma City. And what I also find to be interesting about this is that, and so I'm quoting here from history.com, opponents of the meters considered paying for parking un-American as it forced drivers to pay what amounted to a tax on their cars, depriving them of their money without the due process of law. It sort of sounds like what we hear today about other subjects.
That's exactly right. I remember a guy I knew once years ago said, if you stand on a soapbox in a park and just start ranting stupid things, someone's going to come along and go, he's right.
So let's introduce our colleagues here.
Sure thing. Come on in, Pete Bigelow.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. How are you today?
Hey,
good, Pete.
Good.
How are you doing?
Good.
Doing good. Thank you for the invitation. Glad to join you today.
So,
Great.
Pete, you're sort of the mobility guy at Automotive News, right? Or how would you describe it?
I am on the mobility team at Automotive News. One of the few people who are in that transportation realm.
Yeah, cool. So you're perfect for today's show.
And he's very modest. You can tell. He's the guy.
I am not the guy.
He's the
I am
guy.
one of several on a team. So
Yes.
all credit to my teammates Leslie and Alexa, and there's so much mobility news that you need a team to keep on top of it these days.
Yeah.
And speaking of mobility news,
watch when you say he's a modest guy, because the old rejoinder that I always had is yes, and he has much to be modest about.
Ouch, John.
yeah, that was harsh.
I have to use these lines when I get a chance. Hey, so why don't we bring in our special guest for today, Trevor Pawl. Where is he? Come on in, Trevor. There he is. All right. How you doing there?
I'm hanging in there. I'm at the Planet M landing zone. I'm the only one here today in downtown Detroit, the skeleton crew. And yeah,
all right, Trevor.
Roll.
So the last time we had you on, you were not the chief mobility officer of the state of Michigan, because such a thing did not exist at the time.
No, I came up with his title. He was the emperor of Planet M.
Yeah, so before this new role, I led the Planet M effort, which was the state's platform for connecting mobility companies to opportunities and working with MDOT to get some new mobility technologies out on the road.
But you just got a massive promotion from the governor.
Yeah, it's exciting, but there's a lot of work to do. But
tell us about what is the position and why did she choose you?
So the position itself, well, let me back up for a second. Mobility is hot right now, and it's not just, an economic development story or an infrastructure story or a talent story. All 17 state departments are doing something around mobility and electrification. And within those 17 departments, there are about 135 different councils and commissions that touch it as well, some directly, some indirectly. So the goal of this role in the office is to bring those efforts together as best we can under one common vision. I think, the reason the governor maybe looked at me for this was I have experience building these sorts of programs, Planet M, and then before that, Pure Michigan Business Connect, which was created out of the recession to help the supply chain. So this is the tallest task yet, but me and my team are ready.
Trevor, with 17 departments and 135 commissions, are you basically herding electric cats?
Yes, actually. I have this visual of electric cats in my head now. Well, no, I think it starts, it's like, to use the analogy, rings on a tree. It starts with some of the primary agencies that are really doing great work, from MDOT to the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity that's focused on workforce, to EGLE, the Department of Environment and Great Lakes and Energy. It's a long one. They're doing a ton with grid innovation. So making sure that we get them on board and working together. And then from there, you can expand out to maybe it's the state police or the Department of Agriculture that's working on smart farming and food distribution. That's kind of the approach that we're trying to take here.
Trevor, I'm curious, we hear a lot about mobility efforts in Silicon Valley, in Tel Aviv. Tell us what you're stepping into. What's the state of affairs here in Michigan broadly?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So the way that I like to explain it, I think you can't just start with the Michigan story. You have to start with the global story. 2030 is going to be a big year. Maybe it's just because we're at the beginning of a decade and that's now the new horizon to shoot for. But around that time, EVs are expected to pass internal combustion engine sales, taking like 51% of the market. You have software that is likely going to represent about 50% of the value of the vehicle. In terms of the mobility industry, it will be more established. And the Michigan Mobility Institute actually did a study recently in their Detroit base that said the mobility industry is going to need about 45,000 different types of engineers with computer-related skills. Michigan needs about 12,000 of those to sort of retain its pole position as a mobility leader. So when you look at that, I mean, 2030 is not just going to be something that future leaders are just going to enter. It's going to be something that today's leaders decide. And I believe that, the year 2030 is going to belong to the city and the state that prepares for it best. We have some great competition out there globally, and we need to start working on that now. And that's why this office was created.
Trevor, what's your vision? I mean, let's go out to 2030 and pretend that you've been in the job for 10 years. Where does the state of Michigan end up?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's not really about as much my vision as it is about this governor's vision, which for this office is to be a mechanism for a stronger state economy and do that through safer, more equitable, environmentally sound transportation, which means a multimodal future. We can't just be the global leader, to use a sports analogy, by having a good ground game or being good at passenger vehicles. I think we need, especially now, I mean, you look at the importance of ground drones during the pandemic, from refraction AI in Ann Arbor to Neuro out in California. And even aerial drones are beginning to take off. UPS is running a pretty major pilot. But yet Michigan ranks in the bottom third for drones. It doesn't make any sense because we have a bunch of different companies that have a pretty major Michigan presence that have invested in this technology. So my vision is to continue to lead in autonomous vehicles, but also look at some of these other modes of transportation, both for people and goods, and say, sort of, how can we take what we know in automotive and apply it to those spaces? Because at the end of the day, I mean, autonomous, connected, shared, electric, I mean, they're all the same foundational technologies.
So mobility just is not about cars.
Yes. Yep. It's not. It's the movement of people and goods more efficiently, and automotive is a major piece of it. But even if you look at the $3.3 trillion market that supposedly is going to be created on mobility by 2030, only a portion of that is vehicles. The rest of it's infrastructure, software, maintenance, other services.
Trevor, I'm curious.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Gary. Trevor, I'm curious about this drone aspect. I know there's a report that came out from PricewaterhouseCoopers early this year that said that there's great potential in Michigan to be an aerospace hub. So I'm wondering how that works in with the drones, and how does the supply base here for automotive, is there crossover to those potential sectors as well?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm thinking about drones from a last mile delivery perspective. And I'm thinking about them in terms of what's already here and where the investment is. Michigan drone startups have raised about $36 million in VC by themselves in the last 5 years. And I mentioned earlier, like some of the companies invested, I mean, Ford, Toyota, Hyundai, Audi, I mean, these are OEMs. Well, I don't yet know, because I haven't, been able to get to the back rooms, how the technology is going to blend. But I have to imagine in a multimodal future, companies like Audi and Ford are going to want to create subscription plans that allow you to access their vehicle, but maybe also a fleet of drones to do certain things. So I imagine it's part of a larger play like that.
Trevor, it's great that the state of Michigan is establishing it, and it's a protection move, right? You know, because who knows how this is going to impact the auto industry. We've got to be up at the front of mobility. Yeah. But what can a state do? You know, especially in a country that really has no policy on this. Next week, I'm going to be involved in a very interesting online discussion with a couple of Chinese guys. And the whole thing is U.S. versus China, free enterprise versus state planning. I mean, China's got a plan of how to take this over. Yep. How do you make sure that Michigan plays a role in what the U.S. can do? And what more do you think the U.S. should be doing besides just what Michigan is doing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a big question. And so when you look at the office, I mentioned the vision, but really we have two North Star goals: global mobility leadership and national electrification leadership. Why do I say national? Because there are certain government structures right now that allow that industry to thrive a bit more. And if we can somehow get to the front of the pack in EVs, I think we will be able to influence more of what is done. And I think we can influence more of what is done today. We just gotta put our backs into it a little bit. I mean, you guys saw the announcement yesterday from New York. I think it was a 14-state consortium, and an MOU was signed to focus on electric vehicles. But no states from the Midwest. So Michigan still has an opportunity to do something in the Midwest. But I wish it was us that made that headline yesterday. And so so as much as like Planet M has been helpful on the business development or industry development front, we need to also focus on strategic policy. And that's the other half of this office. And in particular, I mean, I think you need, like right now, Michigan, I think has about an 11% share of EV production. It's supposed to go down to like 8% by 2025. And the Rivian news was not a good look, although they're still going to be here and they're still going to grow here. And I think that's what's lost in the headline a little bit. But we need to sort of focus on incentives that attract EV companies here to create jobs as we're fixing the regulatory environment around EV adoption. So what does that look like? It looks like setting an example. For example, like how can we work together across state agencies for charger placement on state properties? How can we create a tax credit to reimburse EV chargers? How can we, build interstate partnerships that almost create a Great Lakes circuit, an EV network where folks don't have to worry as much about range? And that's just one example, right? EV is just one aspect of the future of mobility. But to us, it's about taking sort of this dual lane approach of policy and just smart industry development.
Trevor, what I'm a little curious about is that, okay, people, we're all homers, and so we're all going to be, pro Michigan, pro Detroit, that sort of thing. But if I'm somebody who is in California or in Arizona or in Australia, I mean, it doesn't matter. They're going to look at Detroit and say, okay, they have the big three, and they do a hell of a job at building pickup trucks. What makes these guys think they know anything about mobility?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess you start with our glut of end customers, 96 of the top 100 global suppliers, which is the classic Chamber of Commerce bullet point that you'd see, which I love because it's such a powerful stat. Frankly, you can design things in Silicon Valley, you can design things in Israel and parts of Asia, but the decision to buy them at mass is going to be done in Saline or Ann Arbor or Detroit or Dearborn or Auburn Hills, and that's just to name a few. And it's not just about assembling vehicles. I mean, you look at some of these global tech clusters, I mean, we have such a unique mix of regional assets around manufacturing. Like some of these places have hardware gaps, like high concentrations of software companies that need rapid prototypers, low run manufacturers. And we have factories operating with excess capacity, and especially during off cycles, right? You look at some of the risky supply chains around the world, IP theft risk, cost prohibitive, especially now you see like the crisis really brought that to bear with PPE. We have a deep, reliable manufacturing expertise. You look at testing, it's American Center for Mobility is a crown jewel, but the truth is we have a whole network around the state, even in the UP for all weather testing that folks can use. So I think it's more about a systems approach where a company or a region can partner with us and we bring some new things to the table.
Trevor, do you see as a result of the pandemic that we're in right now, are there companies that have had a supply chain overseas for a long time, and they want to bring their supply chain, bring their manufacturing plants back to the United States, and are people looking at Michigan in that respect?
Yeah, and I think you're seeing global examples of that. BMW, I read, just announced a new battery supplier that's European-based, Northvolt. And I think you're going to begin to see some of these local suppliers getting more play, just because it does de-risk the supply chain a little bit. This is what I read, a single global shipment from Amazon can touch 30 different organizations and have 200 interactions. So the question that we have in state leadership is like, okay, how do we leverage our new autonomous shared connected technologies to capture more market in this value chain? And I think the question begins there is like, okay, what are your assets? We know that, and I'm sure you guys have read, things are shifting away from, or autonomous technologies are shifting away from passenger vehicles like robo-taxis and into things like autonomous trucking, like you see what Aurora Innovation did out in Silicon Valley and even TuSimple. So that's a whole nother narrative, right, that we haven't talked about. Like, for instance, Michigan's border crossings are globally significant, but in some ways underutilized. We have 2 of the top 3 busiest border ports, but yet, like, for things like freight rail rank, we're not even in the top 5. Or in terms of value of shipments, again, we have the busiest border port, but Ohio and Illinois passes constantly in value of goods shipped. So I think it's as much about sort of understanding where the trends are going and retelling the story in the way that it needs to be told to get the job done. So I know I took your question in a different direction and I maybe gave you too much, but it's something that there's a lot of work.
Trevor, one of the things that I suppose you're working on is smart infrastructure. So the vehicles or transport devices will be able to more smoothly negotiate their way throughout the state or wherever. How are you going to get funding to do something like that? I mean, I don't want to get political here, but the aforementioned governor basically ran on a platform which is fix the damn roads. And in the state of Michigan, as we all know, at least in the Detroit metro area, has lots of potholes. So, this is a huge undertaking that you guys are embarking on. And I just wonder how this is going to be delivered.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think there's a role for capitalization partners and creative business models. Just because we funded roads a certain way up to this point doesn't mean that it has to continue that way. You see in state legislature right now, there's talk of a tolling study, and would it work in certain places? Here's the truth of the matter. There's been almost 10,000 fatal car crashes in Michigan in the last decade, and the national stat is about 94% of all accidents are because of human error. So the sooner we can get smart infrastructure deployed, the more lives can be saved. Potholes are important to fix, but again, with smart infrastructure that can predict and prevent potholes, and we actually funded a pilot in Detroit to do that, it becomes less of a problem. So technology isn't a sideshow here. It's very much core to fixing our issues on the roads.
Trevor, what you're talking about here is going to require investment. You talked maybe there's a consortium, some capitalization. Clearly, all 50 states are going to be in dire financial straits coming out of this pandemic, unless Congress steps up in a big way. Do you see any hope of maybe federal monies becoming available to tap into some of the things that you're working on, or I mean, this is a tough time. How do you think that you'll be able to get the money to do the kinds of things you need to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yes, obviously, it's sort of a get in line right now with federal dollars, and that makes sense to me. Like our Restart grants right now that have been pretty heavily promoted are about helping small businesses stay alive. And so I think there's a role for transportation mobility in CARES Act funding and innovation and recovery. There's also a time for it. But you also see news like that came out of General Motors, where the DOE announced a pretty substantial sized grants to focus on structures for EV vehicles, for batteries. And so I think in it's not all going to come like in one fell swoop, federal dollars, but I think in certain areas that make a lot of sense, I think we'll be able to find federal dollars over the next couple of years.
Trevor, you mentioned the pilot project with the predictive potholes in Detroit. What are some of the other startups that Michigan has provided some funding for? What are some of the other kind of pilot projects that are underway around the state?
Yeah, so we fundamentally believe, and this is not going to change with this new office, startups enrich business R&D environments. And Michigan's become a national leader in leveraging R&D from these mobility startups to help communities in a very real way. And I wish I had more time to answer this question because it's one of my favorites to answer. So the Planet M program actually will go and seek out problems in local communities, like getting medicine across the hospital campus, like having digital alerts between fire and police and EMS in Grand Rapids, like checking rural power lines, like helping the elderly get to the grocery store in the central UP. So we will come in and sort of find a company that's best in class in the world, and hopefully they're in Michigan, and fund them to solve a problem for a period of time. And from there, we hope that the local municipality or the business finds a business model that's sustainable and can continue it. So for example, I mentioned the UP, in the UP, the elderly, especially in the central UP, there's not as much access to public transportation to go to the grocery store, go to the doctor's office. So we worked on a pilot to leverage idle government fleets. We worked with What Three Words, which is a London, UK-based company, one of the hottest startups in the world. We had them work in Ann Arbor to help the elderly and persons with disabilities find and locate their bus stops. Giving you another example here, that you may have heard about the autonomous shuttle route in Grand Rapids that May Mobility developed, and it's currently, I believe, the longest public shuttle route. We helped fund that, and then now in the pandemic, to take it a step further, we found a Grand Haven-based company that does a special UV technology to clean the surfaces in the air in autonomous shuttles. So that way, people in Grand Rapids can still feel safe using that form of transportation.
Trevor, many of the automotive suppliers that have locations here in Michigan are international companies. So what is the extent that you see your office, reaching across borders and working with, companies from other parts of the world to advance your mission here in Michigan?
Yeah, that's another great. You guys are just knocking it out of the park with great questions. So the truth is, we need to create bi-directional opportunities. The deep relationships aren't formed by a one-way flow of communication, of feedback loops of opportunities, right? That's to drive success at scale. So one of the areas we want to focus on is, okay, we know that software companies around the world, especially maybe some of these last mile delivery companies, are going to need hardware. So where can we match up Michigan companies, get even the old school manufacturers, the ones that helped us win World War II, get them involved. It's not just about these new school companies. We want to get some of these, Mound Road, Van Dyke machine shops involved. So from there, like thinking about, okay, what tier ones are still focused on connected solutions, and what tier ones still have money to spend on those connected solutions, and how can we help them connect to startups, connect to universities all around the world to increase their competitive advantage. So, I mean, we have great relationships in Silicon Valley. We have great relationships in Israel. I think we could do a better job in Europe, honestly, and I think we could do a better job in Asia. So beginning to sort of sign MOUs with government officials over there, and then from there, sort of find the aggregators in these markets to connect us with the right companies. And ultimately, yeah, we want these companies to locate in Michigan, but it starts with a positive transactional relationship. And that's what this office will try to build.
Do other states have an office like this?
The answer is they have versions of it. Like even cities do, right? I mean, Mark de Laverne is the chief mobility officer for Detroit, and he has his own office. But to my knowledge, it's the first chief mobility officer and first dedicated office focused on the future of mobility and electrification.
So Trevor, when you talked about creating maybe a Great Lake consortium which ought to include Canada, by the way.
Absolutely.
But how do you know who to reach out to?
Well, you're not always going to bat 1,000, but it really, I think it's a numbers game. One of the things that our Planet M team has done through the years, and the Planet M program will now shift under this new office, which is great because it means we can double down on Planet M, is we track every connection we make. So John, for example, if I introduce you to a really interesting startup founder or a head of transportation somewhere, and it was a great interview, I actually there's a spreadsheet and I write that down. And so since 2017, we've actually done 5 qualified introductions a day. And it doesn't always pan out, but I find that if you can start with that unit of connection, that person remembers you and you can go back to them and say, who within your region should I talk to about this? That you begin to dig deeper. And that's sort of our secret sauce, which I guess I shouldn't have shared the recipe on the air. But that's sort of how we do it. And sometimes you get really lucky. And that's why I never ever viewed Silicon Valley as a competitor. I mean, I think they're a very complementing partner. And what I found is that there are enough Michigan expats out there who really care about the state, that want to help. If you can get in touch with them, they'll connect you to 3 other people. And all of a sudden you have a major project that the state has a chance to work on.
Trevor, isn't there, if I'm remembering this correctly, there's something called like the Smart Belt Initiative that's Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan. That is that kind of a foundational element to a greater Great Lakes consortium that might already have started efforts? Yes, it is. It's active too, which is what I really like about it. We just were actually talking about it yesterday with MDOT, who leads it. And that's an important note. So this office isn't going to just float on Government Island. It's going to be connected. It's going to be very, very entrenched in MDOT's vision and MDOT's objectives and the governor's office objectives, as well as obviously our economic development arm, the MEDC, and the Department of, man, these are long names, but the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. So we are sort of a team effort, if you will. And MDOT leads those coalitions, and we're going to try to empower them the best we can.
Trevor, have you had the opportunity?
Go ahead, Gary. Then we got to take a quick break.
Have you had the opportunity to sit down with Mary Barra or Jim Hackett or Mike Manley and talk about this?
So I'm in week 2. So the answer is not yet, but I want to, and I will. And I won't be the only person in that room. I believe we'll have other senior officials as well that are committed to those companies and committed to the future of mobility.
Well, good. Hey, we've got to take a quick commercial break right now. We're going to give a shout out to our good friends at Borg Warner. We're going to come back. We're going to talk more mobility. I know Gary's got a list of things, of topics that we need to get into. But right now, Borg Warner.
The world is changing at an ever-increasing pace. No matter what the mode of transportation, there is always the need for an efficient propulsion system. And that's exactly what Borg Warner has been doing since the earliest days of the automotive industry. We create innovative mobility technologies that reduce energy consumption and emissions while improving performance. Our proven track record has made us an industry leader in forward-looking propulsion solutions for combustion, hybrid, and electric vehicles.
All right, we're back talking all things mobility and all things automotive. So, Gary, what I'm wondering is you've got some topics that you think we need to get into. What you got on your list?
All right. So one of the companies that Trevor mentioned, coincidentally enough, TuSimple, which is a company that is developing autonomous technology for Class 8 trucks, announced a partnership with Navistar, through which Navistar will be building specific purpose-built trucks to integrate the TuSimple hardware and software rather than doing a retrofit. Trevor mentioned that, mobility is about more than just moving people and moving goods as well. I mean, as we had the Trevor Milton on the show recently from Nikola talking about his Class 8 truck. So what's going on here, guys? Is the money going to be all going to commercial trucks and things like that for autonomous technology? What do you think, Pete?
Well, I think, and Trevor alluded to this earlier, but certainly we see the general shift away from robo-taxi dollars toward delivery applications for autonomous systems. And, isn't it interesting to see how TuSimple is in the news a whole lot over the past month? And we see the likes of Waymo and Aurora talking a lot about their self-driving truck divisions, not so much their robo-taxi divisions these days.
Yeah.
Do you think that's...
Sorry, go ahead, Gary.
I was going to say, do you think that that's predicated primarily on the pandemic and that people have reticence in terms of getting into vehicles, but you can stick in a bag of groceries and no one cares?
I don't think so. I'd be curious what conversations Trevor's had in that respect, but I think it's a little bit more of a long-term shift that probably started pre-pandemic and is now accelerating during it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was reading it. Morgan Stanley estimates that self-driving technology could save Amazon over $20 billion a year. And by 2030, it could save just supply chain logistics costs across the board by almost 50%. So I think the business case is there. I mean, I can only speak from a government official perspective, but for us to make bets, it's a lot easier to make bets on goods because there's less corridors. Like the commercial corridors, for instance, from Detroit to Toledo, it's pretty easy for MDOT to look at the data. It's maybe a little harder, but still easier to then look at, okay, we know how much commerce floats between Detroit and Toledo. And then, to be able to, again, leverage like truck platooning technology, which already exists, warehouse hubs, which are all along the way. When you put all those variables together, it's a lot more of a more compelling case, I think, for government to invest in corridors like that than it is for us to sort of set up sensors at every downtown corner in the hopes that we can have 10 autonomous shuttles all working in unison and a dog running across the street and whatever else happens in big cities with passenger vehicles.
I'm curious, for both Trevor and Pete, there was a study, and Pete, maybe, I think it came out of MIT. It was probably a year ago, maybe a little bit more, that said, you can't make money with autonomous robo-taxis. And they laid out all the expenses, and they said it's actually more expensive than having a driver in the car. Have you guys looked into this?
Yeah, I think, John, you're exactly right in that study from MIT from a researcher named Ashley Nunez, who I think, if I remember correctly, he found that the costs of operating a robo-taxi were about 3 times greater for a consumer than they would be if that same consumer owned an older model, car via conventional car ownership. So, and I think that certainly was one of the key mileposts along this way of some companies saying, I think maybe there's other applications that might have more urgency, certainly, for self-driving systems.
Yeah, Trevor, did you see that thing? And that's why the reason I'm asking is I think this gets back to Gary's original question. Why does the whole autonomy world seem to be shifting to commercial fleets rather than individual transportation?
It's cheaper. It can be safer. I don't think it's a very academic answer. And frankly, the world needs less human touch right now in its supply chain. And frankly, people are just ordering more groceries versus going to the grocery, or having them delivered versus going to the grocery store. I think it all starts with consumer preferences and a true market demand, which was accelerated because of the pandemic.
Yeah, and Pete, going back to that MIT study, I think some of their assumptions, to my eye at least, were erroneous. One of the things that they assumed is that every 50 miles, an autonomous car would have to go to a service center and have all the lenses of its cameras and sensors wiped off so that they're clean. My guess is there's going to be other solutions around it. They also say that you've got to have a human being monitoring all these autonomous cars, and then you have to have a monitor monitoring the monitors, and they added up all that cost at San Francisco wages, and that's how it got out of cost control very quickly. I'm not sure I totally buy the some of the underlying assumptions of that study.
I don't remember that aspect of the baseline assumptions, John, but I do remember one of them was that they set the cost of the actual vehicle itself to, I think, $15,000 or $20,000, which I thought was really low. On the flip side, because when you start adding in the cost of all these sensors and software, I think we all would recognize that the cost of an autonomous vehicle on the road will be substantially more than $20,000.
Yeah.
I think that the number that Trevor read from that Morgan Stanley study about how much Amazon would make by autonomous is probably the answer to that question, and probably the answer to why they bought Zoox or are in the process of buying Zoox, and why they've plowed so much money into Rivian.
Yeah.
Anybody?
No, I agree. Amen.
What else is on your list, Gary?
Well, so it was sort of interesting that the aforementioned Mr. Elon Musk seems to be potentially making a whole lot of money due to what he has done with the fortunes of Tesla. I guess on the order of 1.69 million shares that he may get options on, which would make him a very rich man at the rate at which Tesla is valued right now. So is this crazy, Pete? Is this just insane talk?
Well, every time I've thought that over the years, Gary, I think time and time again, we've just seen Tesla's stock price rise. And, certainly it's again questionable, just like it has been with Autopilot. We've heard a lot about how the name does not necessarily confer the idea of what the driver assist system actually does. And now we, very recently heard Elon talking about how, level 5 autonomy is nearly complete. So it's always a very optimistic story from Mr. Musk.
Yes. And the Germans just came out and said, you can't use that term autopilot because it's misleading, as you seem to indicate. What do you think, John?
In terms of what?
In terms of what's going on at Tesla, is this all irrational exuberance?
Yeah, it is. But there's underlying fundamentals here that are driving it. It's not just craziness, though there's plenty of that. What Tesla represents is the ultimate market disruptor. And ARK Investments, which has been probably the most bullish investment firm on Tesla, keeps citing this. The fact that they're going to have full self-driving, true full self-driving, how owners will then be able to turn their private cars into shared cars and earn money on them. How Tesla is able to monetize so much of the data that goes in and out of its cars, how it's able to offer some updates for free and charge for others, how it sells its own insurance, how it will even sell you solar panels to power your home and recharge your Tesla. So what the investment community sees is it's not just a car company, it's truly a tech company. And, we had Hao Tai-Tang on the show last week, and he talked about the changing business model in the industry. It's no longer transactional. I buy a car and I disappear for years, and then I show up and maybe buy another one, but maybe not from the same brand. To a ongoing relational kind of business model a la Tesla, where you get money out of customers all the time. Even if they're not pulling out their wallet to hand you money, you're able to monetize the data going in and out of the car. And that's what the market and what investors like ARK are looking at, is Tesla is changing the business model. And when you look at it with that set of eyes, $1,500 a share is nothing. I mean, ARK is saying, they've got a bull and a bear case. The bear case is it only goes to $7,000 a share. The bull case is it goes to $15,000 a share. So we'll see if it actually happens or not, because, Pete, to your point, Tesla is famous for overpromising and under-delivering. We still don't have full self-driving. They haven't even had their battery day yet. But it delivers enough that enough investors are ponying up the money to keep driving that price up.
So you mentioned a subscription service, John, and so BMW has come out, and we haven't talked about this. They've come out with a subscription service that their new 7.0 version of their operating system will allow you to buy a subscription to, I don't know, adaptive cruise control, heated seats, and if you don't pay, it goes away. Now, as you recall, BMW also was going to charge a subscription for Apple CarPlay, which they got tremendous pushback on, and they said, "Oh, es tut mir leid, I'm very sorry," and recounted on that. So, isn't there the possibility that consumers are going to push back on some of this subscription payments going to car companies? Pete?
Oh yeah, big time. You're going to charge me to heat my seats? Forget it. I'm not buying a car from you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, that's a harsh reality that probably awaits that. My suspicions would be that consumers will absolutely hate that, as they did the Apple CarPlay, monthly charge.
And again, going back to How Titang last week, there are services that consumers will happily pay for. That's what BMW should be focused on. New ways of getting goods and services to people that they'll readily pay for, not getting greedy and trying to see how you can nickel and dime them to death on things that they expect to have automatically when they buy a car.
Trevor, you can chime in as a private citizen, by the way. So
yeah, I got to be careful, right?
Here's a question for you, Trevor. What about all these? You're in charge of mobility for the state of Michigan.
Yeah.
But what about this whole concept of being able to monetize stuff, data and the like, data and services? Is there even an opportunity for the state to make money off it?
I think we have to be careful because of data privacy. And frankly, I think data as currency is a slippery slope in general, because oftentimes that data isn't yours. It's a person's, a real person's. But I look at the airline industry and how I remember flying as a kid or teen and having a lot more, whether it was space for my knees or free food or free snacks or whatever. And over time, you lost that room. You lost some of the things that would probably come naturally, like internet, when the internet became readily available, but people got used to paying for those things. So I don't think the model itself is like, let's make them happy in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. It's probably like in 7 to 10 years, they'll get used to it. And then that's a line of revenue that we'll have for the next 50 years, which it sucks, but I just think that's how the market is thinking about this.
One of the things that I thought about is in context of this is that I never imagined that I would pay for radio in my car. Okay. Yet I have Sirius. I have a radio. I can listen to Jeff Gilbert on WWJ, whom we've had on the show. Just a little plug for Jeff. But I choose to do that. So is it possible that maybe people are going to say, yeah, I'll pay for that in my car from BMW, and maybe these guys are geniuses.
That's an interesting thought, Gary, because I have Sirius as well. In a way, it's kind of like thinking about what Trevor said. Like, it's not my airplane, but it is my car, and I don't want to feel like the car company is constantly kind of taking that $20 bill out of my wallet on a monthly basis or whatever it is. So I think there's a mindset around the ownership that, or maybe something around who am I sending that money to? Like, I don't mind Sirius because it's someone other than the car company that's providing the service. But there's a psychology there to be explored for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Go ahead, Trevor.
Oh no, I was just agreeing. Sorry.
Okay. You guys will pay for Sirius because you see value in it. There's a bunch of different stations. You like it. Very little commercials and very little DJ chatter and whatnot. But when it comes to things like heated seats, I don't know where you draw the line, but there's going to be more consumers who will be annoyed at feeling like greedy car companies are trying to shake them by the ankles versus content or other service providers who are providing them with goods and services that they happily will pay for.
Well, I do have a thought on that. So welcome to the golden age of advertising again. I think we'll be entering that, because sometimes it's not as much about the message as it is the messenger. So in some cases, I think BMW is relying on their top end customers, their opinion leaders, to enjoy the service and pay for the service readily, and then ultimately leverage that to get to, it's sort of that tree ring analogy that I was using to describe the office, actually. And so I also think, like, there are compelling ways, if you can introduce another benefit to offset, heated seats. I don't realize I'm paying for heated seats. So it's tricky, and I don't agree with a lot of the tactics, but I just think it could be the reality of the situation.
Yeah. All right. So moving on, beating up on BMW, and but you did say that nice thing about that they did that deal with the Swedish
Northvolt
battery manufacturing company, and they claimed because the Swedish battery manufacturer uses all green energy in producing its goods. So props to BMW for that one. So I thought it was very interesting that Fisker, which is showing us the Fisker Ocean over and over and over again, and it may come out someday, is doing one of those reverse merger things with Spartan Energy Acquisition Corp. John, what's going on here in terms of these companies? Nikola did the same sort of thing. How does this work?
Yeah. Okay. So a brief little run through of it all. They're referred to as reverse mergers. Sometimes they're called blank check companies. Sometimes they're called SPACs, which stands for special acquisition. And these are investors who have gone out and bought the legal shell of a company. So let's say I had a broom company and I got it listed on the stock exchange, and I decide, I'm just going to close up shop. I'm retiring. I'm not doing anything with my company anymore. And somebody comes along and says, hey, John, you go ahead and retire. I want to buy the legal shell of your company because you're traded on the stock exchange. And now once I get that legal shell, I go out looking for startups who want to go public. And I say, hey, look, even if you haven't built any products, even if you've never made a dime of profit in your lives, let's do a reverse merger. You will merge with me, and instead of being the John McElroy Broom Company, you can call it the Karma or the Fisker or the Nikola Company, whatever you want, and bada boom, bada bing, you're publicly traded. And now, because all the investors are gaga with dollar signs in their eyes, looking for the next Tesla, bango, here's this thing called Nikola. They're doing fuel cells, they're electric, they're blah, 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 but bang, they're publicly traded. It would have taken Trevor years to go the normal route of building up a company, making it profitable, and getting traded. Same with Karma or Fisker. It's so much easier to go and do these reverse mergers, get instantly listed, and in the frenzy of investing in electrics right now, they're riding the wave. And, if they tried to do it the normal route, who knows? The wave could be over and done with in a couple of years. They're striking while the iron's hot.
And just for those who are listening or watching, John was not referring to our guest, Trevor, making all this money with his company. He was referring to Trevor Milton, who is the chairman of Nikola that was right on the show. Yeah. And
hey, wait, one quick, we got to take another quick commercial break. Okay. This will be very short, but a good shout out to our friends at Bridgestone. All right, we're back. Go ahead, Gary.
So before leaving Fisker, I thought it was interesting in the presentation that they filed with the SEC about what they were up to, that they indicated that they're trying to do a deal with Volkswagen to get the Volkswagen MEB platform for their vehicle. And it almost seemed to me that they also were indicating that they don't plan on having a factory necessarily to build these vehicles. So I would assume that this would be somebody else would build them for them. Maybe that could be Volkswagen. Pete, what's going on here?
Well, I think part of it is that Volkswagen has always said that it wanted to expand the MEB platform beyond Volkswagen itself. So I think, perhaps we thought Ford might be the first example of that, but it turns out that Henrik Fisker has apparently made that a reality. But I think you're right. That would make sense. And I think Henrik has said that, it doesn't necessarily make sense for a company like Fisker to go through the exercises of building its own factory, which is obviously very capital intensive. So they seem to have found a partner in Volkswagen, or
are trying to,
or are reasonably close to doing so. So the media tells us these days.
Right. So I want to ask you guys about this. So recently, independent of this thing that Fisker's done, it's raised $100 million recently. Rivian has raised another $2.5 billion, and Karma has raised $100 million. Okay, all of these electric car companies. So what's happening? I mean, what electric cars are 2% of the entire sales right now? Something like that? And yet these guys are making all this money. What's going on?
Well, Trevor, what was your stat earlier about what percentage of the fleet EVs will be by 2030? I think that
33% by 2025.
Those are pretty optimistic numbers. None of the traditional car companies would buy into that. For example, Honda has set a goal of 15%, 15% by 2030 for its global sales being electric.
Yeah, that's McKinsey data. And it was also data, before the pandemic, right? So everything's subject to change. But I think you're seeing with some of these bets being placed that there's going to be an acceleration at some point in the next maybe 2 to 3 years, or at most 5 to 7 years, that could get us to some of these percentages by 2030.
And I think it was beyond the traditional passenger car, right? Like Rivian working with Amazon would be one key example there. A lot of it, I think, is accelerated by delivery.
Speaking of Rivian, John, you had reported on Daily, this was 2 or 3 weeks ago, that when Rivian was shifting its people from Plymouth to California, that it was something about Detroit not being cool. What was that about?
It wasn't so much that Detroit's not cool. We did not report that. But what Rivian people, well, look, number one, RJ Scaringe, the CEO of the company, lives in Southern California. I've noticed this in my career that when companies pick up and move, it always goes to wherever the CEO is living. So there's that. Number two is, so people in Rivian told me they felt they could not recruit the coding, the programmers that they needed to Michigan. That it was very hard to get them here. And so all future development is going to be done in California. But I still come back to what I said at first. Wherever the CEO lives is where companies tend to end up, especially if they're entrepreneurs and it's their company.
So Trevor, how are you going to stop this nonsense?
Well, I think it's worth mentioning that, the governor picked up the phone right away and talked to RJ and had a really productive conversation about the future. So actually our relationship with Rivian is very good. And to be honest with you, I think it has a lot to do with the regulatory environment, like I mentioned before. And it also has to do with R&D incentives and sort of picking some focus industries that the state just needs to win at and then investing there. And I know that, state dollars are usually risk averse, but to the extent that we can increase that risk a little bit to build out this EV industry, I'm a fan of that, as long as it's done responsibly. I think there are a lot of things that Michigan has going for it, from the human capital, the engineering base, cost of living against California, that makes this an attractive place to be. But I don't look at it like Rivian can have a thriving California operation and still be a huge player here in Michigan. It's not an or story, it's an and story, and we have to remember that.
So is the vision of an industry, a mobility industry in Michigan, a whole bunch of giant factories like it would have been in the early 20th century, that we would look at that and say, oh, that's the mark of success. They've got all these giant factories. Or is it different? Is it that there'd be more small facilities, more boutique builders rather than massive integrated manufacturing facilities?
That's a fascinating question, because I think it comes down to the customer. So the local motors model of having your car printed in a shop that looks like an Apple store, is that what the future wants? And if it is, we'll find a way to get it done. And maybe we're entering into a world where that is the case, and then you have a bunch of boutique shops that are serviced, like the back room services as the sort of the manufacturing facility, and the tier ones locate next to that. I don't know, but I'll tell you what it does look like. It looks like a future with more Bollingers, a future with more Rivians, a future with more Ford, GM, and Honda and Toyota acquisitions of some of these smaller companies. And it looks more like it's funny how history has repeated itself so drastically this year. It's going to look a lot more like 1920, I think, going forward than it will just even 10 years ago in terms of some of the startups and new entrants into the market.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Peter, what
Gary,
are you seeing as you're... Oh, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to get back to the Fisker thing for a minute here. I mean, if all he's going to do is buy the MEDB platform from Volkswagen and have Volkswagen or somebody else assemble it for him, I mean, what are you bringing to the party here? Styling? Henrik Fisker is a dynamite stylist, one of the best in the business. But you can't build a car company around styling. Styling goes out of favor, and you try to come out with new stuff, but you can't always hit a home run. Nobody has. So I don't see what the value proposition of a Fisker is whatsoever coming into the market as a new EV producer. What I've seen is when companies bring something new to the party, that's what gives them an edge. And that's why Tesla has been so successful. It's done so many things that are so different than any other automaker has ever done before. If you go back, the reason Toyota became so successful, it had a totally different way of manufacturing, the Toyota production system. You need to bring something new to the party if you're really going to survive and thrive. I don't see Fisker bringing anything new to the party.
Does that go for...
Pete, what are you seeing?
So many of these companies, though, not to pick on anybody, but, we can fill a whole bucket of the, Faraday Future, the Byton, et cetera. And, I don't know that there's a great answer to your, to that question about how are they differentiating themselves in a meaningful way. I think the answer we kind of get is through infotainment or potentially the connected services, the interior. They're going to, do something different than what we've seen, but I don't know that we have clear answers to that yet, John.
Yeah, I don't think we do either. And I don't see any of those that, the Faradays, the Lucids, the Neos, the list goes on and on. I don't see them bringing anything new to the party. That doesn't mean they're not going to survive. Probably 2 or 3 might. But in the automotive industry, if you really want to be an ongoing concern and really be profitable, you have to bring something new that nobody else is doing.
All right. So speaking of which, and we are coming toward the end of this thing, and I think that we need to talk about a normal car company that is doing exceedingly well. So you mentioned, John, that we had Hao Tai Tang on the show last week talking about the Ford F-150. We've had Ford announce at long last the Ford Bronco, and Ford will also be having the Mustang Mach-E coming out before the year is through. What's going on at Ford? I mean, they're just rolling out with serious competitive product.
Yeah, I think they're hitting their stride under Jim Hackett right now. And, I don't know what you guys think, but I think the Bronco looks great. Keyword there being looks. I haven't actually physically seen or driven it yet. And I know There are some others who have, but early indications are I think they did a really nice job with it, and I do think this is kind of part of we're finally seeing the Jim Hackett imprint on product, and he's done away with Fiesta, et cetera, and now we're kind of getting to that streamlined lineup that really has an emotional appeal to longtime Ford enthusiasts and beyond.
Yeah, I would build on that. What we're seeing, the one thing that Jim Hackett has really done for the Ford Motor Company that is transformational is introducing this customer-centric design, which if anybody watching doesn't know much about it, go back and watch the How Tai Tang show from a week ago. So customer-centric design is basically engineers and product planning people go out in the field. They live, breathe, and eat and sleep with customers, watching customers, how they actually use their vehicle. They look for problems. They look for pain points. And then they quickly come up with prototypes, sometimes made out of cardboard and Scotch tape. Get quick customer feedback, reiterate that design, that is, improve it, incorporate their ideas, more cardboard and Scotch tape, and keep doing that until the customer goes, bingo, you nailed it. And so the first three products to come out of this process are the all-new F-150, the Mustang Mach-E, and the new Broncos. And to the looks of it, these things are going to be smash hits. So you got to give a lot of credit to Hackett for that. The only criticism I have is that this is very typical of the Ford Motor Company. It goes on this product tear, and then it drops off into nothing. Its product cadence is peaks and valleys, and not the sort of steady stream of products like you see coming out of a Toyota or a Honda. That's what Ford needs to figure out how it can get back onto. Instead of coming out with 3 smash hits all at once and then they disappear for years, they need to have 2 products, one Lincoln, one Ford, coming out that is a smash hit every single year.
John, maybe to that point, though, we didn't include this in the string of recent announcements, but they did say about a month ago that the active drive assist feature that's part of the Copilot 360 system is due in 2022, if I remember correctly. And I think that that's something that could potentially, win customers across the lineup and at least compete with Super Cruise from the GM side, which is going to roll into, I think, 22 new models by 2023. So, cross vehicle, I think that's another enhancement that we do see coming from Ford.
Totally agree. That is the kind of feature that you can spread across your line and bring in customers who are going to literally buy cars just because it's got that feature in it.
It's sort of funny. This goes back to the BMW thing in a way. Okay. So what a customer needs to do is to buy one of these vehicles that is going to be offering it. So the F-150 will offer it, and the Mustang will offer it, and the Bronco will offer it. So you buy it, but it doesn't work till later. Okay. So in some months, you'll be able to turn it on. So you're going to be for how many months with your vehicle and it's not happening, right? But you had to buy that at the start.
Well, that's the Tesla genius that we talked about, is there's these continual enhancements. It's not that you left the dealership and everybody forgot about you, the customer, for a while. It's building on that relationship as you own the piece of hardware.
Mm-hmm. But wouldn't it be like buying a flashlight and then you'd have the flashlight, but you wouldn't have a bulb and you wouldn't have batteries? And then eventually they would say to you, I haven't forgotten about you. Here's the bulb. And then a few months later they say, and now the batteries.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite to that level, because you're going to buy an F-150, a Bronco, a Mach-E that actually work. And this is going to be, in some cases, the over-the-air updates and the like are going to be for free. So you wake up one morning, you go out to the garage or your car parked in the driveway, start it up, and you go, wow, everything's better. The screen looks better. It accelerates faster. It goes farther if it's an electric car. Even the sound system is improved, which is one of the Tesla updates. So this is a way of really nailing customer satisfaction. And for the first time in history, a car can actually get better with age. not just deteriorate. And then when you come out with something like full self-driving, the Ford, I can't, what was it? I can't even remember their name for their Super Cruise. It's they got to come up with something better. But all I'm getting at is that when you finally offer that, and they'll pay handsomely to unlock that feature. I mean, customers are going to go nuts over this. It's going to almost be like going through the new car buying experience again.
And you, just to that point, I mean, you look at the lines around Apple stores, right? There's going to be this level of anticipation when things are unlocked. That's just going to be new. It's going to be new to the industry.
Right.
John, I think one last point on that. The name is Active Drive Assist, and it may kind of be forgettable, but on the other hand, it's very clear about what it is, unlike, say, some other competitive products out there.
Although we must point out though that it's Active Drive Assist within the Copilot 360 2.0 system. So you got to get that all in there. So I think John's right.
Yeah, Pete, let their marketing people name it, not the lawyers or the engineers. They should call it Cruise-O-Matic.
I like that, but I also like the clarity of I know exactly what it is and is not.
Well, when airbags first came out, if you guys remember, the little covering on the steering wheel or above the glove box where the airbags reside said SRS. Supplemental Restraint System. Car companies would not call them airbags at all. Why? Because the public had the idea, it's an airbag, it's going to save me, I'll never get hurt in the car again. And the lawyers went, no, you can't call it that. You have to call it supplemental. Supplemental meaning you already have to be wearing a seatbelt. So that and it was embossed into all the coverings, SRS. Well, that's gone by the wayside. Everybody calls them airbags now. They brag, we got 11 airbags in this car, not 11 SRS systems. So my prediction is whatever you called the Ford thing, it's go to Cruise-O-Matic. Everybody can remember it.
John will be doing these commercials on late night TV, in the middle of the night, he'll be there. Cruise-O-Matic. All right, Trevor. So you've been a good sport sitting here this whole time. So let's get back to you. What does your first 100 days look like as the chief mobility officer, the first guy who's ever had this job? And you'll probably be the first guy of many subsequent ones as time goes on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's a phased approach. To some degree, there's some setup that's going to be involved. That's the first phase. Securing resources. Our dollars for this office, they're going to be tied to the state budget. So we have to see how that plays out. But that doesn't mean we sit idly by. We need to begin to form feedback loops with key groups. So getting out there, doing listening tours, but then also creating opportunities for universities to talk to more companies, having cities get on a call together to talk about common problems. And from there, I think you'll begin to see some interesting projects that emerge. One of the things that's important for this office is that, we look at the broader economic outcomes that we want to see, whether it's state rankings or certain types of job creation or percentage of car companies in Michigan that are actually doing autonomous shared connected work in the state, electric work in the state, and raising that percentage. This office isn't going to be directly responsible for some of those macroeconomic changes, but what we can do every day that goes by, we can create little key performance indicators that move us in the right direction, and we can get a lot better about tracking that narrative and working with partners to do that, to begin to refine our story. So the first 100 days for me is going to be very much about setting up those systems. And then in the fall, restarting our programming, whether it's our technology deployment grants, the Council on Future Mobility. I haven't talked about that yet, but that's going to be a part of this new office. So governor-appointed council of industry, legislators, and state government heads. They're going to have some pretty fiery debates about some pretty hot topics in mobility and electrification. And they're going to provide recommendations for updates to our state laws around autonomous vehicles and other modes of transportation. And what's unique about our council is that we have the largest industry representation, and we'll be rolling out those appointments soon. So I think you'll be hearing more from us in the coming months. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Hey, look, I'll just throw my 2 cents in. I think it's really cool. Number one, kudos to Governor Gretchen Whitmer for coming up even with the idea of creating this office. And it's so cool she selected you to be able to run it. I can't wait to see how this all develops. I think it's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, no, I can't wait to keep talking to you. You're my road dog, John. We're going to do this together. You too, Pete. You too, Gary.
Cool. Okay, guys.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons. Get your daily fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv.